Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the life and the reign of Emperor Ashoka. He's a huge figure in the Mauryan Empire.
Absolutely. We've got some great source material to work with, and the aim is really to pull out the key threads, give you a solid grasp of who he was and what shaped his rule.
Okay, so maybe set the scene for us a bit.
Yeah.
The Mauryan Empire, where and when was this?
Right, so think South Asia, a massive empire based in Magadha, that's sort of northeast India today, founded around 320 BCE by Chandragupta Maurya.
Ashoka's grandfather.
Exactly.
Right.
And our understanding, well, it comes from a few key places.
Mm-hmm.
There are accounts from Megasthenes, a Greek ambassador. We don't have his original work, but later Roman writers preserve parts of it.
Okay.
Then, crucially, we have Ashoka's own words, his edicts, carved on rocks and pillars all across the empire. They weren't even deciphered until 1838.
Wow, that late, so that unlocked a lot.
It really did. And then there's the Arthashastra. It's this ancient text on statecraft, politics, economics. Really influential. It was rediscovered much later, early 20th century, and we now think it probably had multiple authors over time, not just one person like Chanakya.
Got it. So the Mauryan Empire, Chandragupta founds it around 320 BCE. Ashoka comes later.
Yeah, Ashoka's reign starts around 268 BCE, and his name, Ashoka, it actually means without sorrow.
Huh. That's ironic, considering what we know is coming with the Kalinga War.
It really is. And in his edicts, he calls himself Devanampiya Piyadasi,
Meaning?
beloved of the gods and gracious of mien or appearance. So he projects this quite benevolent image.
But there's this massive shift, right? You mentioned the Kalinga War. That's the core of his story, this transformation.
Absolutely. It's what makes him so fascinating. He goes from this, well, seemingly ruthless expansionist ruler to a major proponent of peace. But to get there, we need to understand his background, his predecessors.
And his family, Chandragupta, the founder.
Yep.
Any cool stories there?
Well, one persistent story is that Chandragupta, as a young man, actually met Alexander the Great.
No way.
Yeah, it's debated, but it's out there. What's certain is that after Alexander died in 323 BCE, Chandragupta, with his advisor Chanakya, who's also called Kautilya or Vishnugupta, very clever guy, started consolidating power. He even went head-to-head with Seleucus I.
One of Alexander's generals, right, took over the eastern bits.
That's the one. And around 302 BCE, they actually struck a deal, an alliance.
What did that involve?
It was pretty significant. There was a dynastic marriage, so family ties. And Chandragupta gave Seleucus 500 war elephants.
500? That's a serious military asset back then.
Huge! And in return, Seleucus handed over his eastern territories, places like Gandhara, parts of modern Afghanistan and Pakistan. Big strategic win for Chandragupta. Those elephants, by the way, supposedly helped Seleucus win battles later on against other Greek kings.
Interesting. So Chandragupta builds this empire. Then comes Ashoka's father.
Right, Bindusara. His nickname was Amitragata.
Slayer of enemies. Doesn't sound very peaceful.
No, suggests he continued the expansion, or at least consolidation. He also kept up ties with the Greek world. There's a story about him asking Antiochus I, Seleucus' son, for sweet wine, dried figs, and a sophist.
A philosopher.
Yeah, like a wise man or teacher. Apparently, Antiochus sent the wine and figs, but said Greek custom didn't allow selling philosophers.
Huh. Okay, so these guys, Chandragupta and Bindusara, they set the stage. How does Ashoka actually get the throne? Was it smooth?
Well, the sources are a bit murky on the succession itself, but when Ashoka dies much later, none of his known sons take over immediately.
Oh, what happened to them?
Mahinda became a Buddhist monk, spread the religion to Sri Lanka. Kunala was supposedly blinded. Tuvala died young. Jaloka, we don't know much about him.
So who did succeed Ashoka?
His grandson, Dasharatha Maurya. It hints that maybe things weren't perfectly stable, maybe some internal politics after Ashoka's long reign.
Okay, so Ashoka takes over around 268 BCE. What kind of empire is he inheriting? You said Chandragupta expanded a lot.
Oh, massively. Chandragupta's empire already stretched from, say, modern Afghanistan across northern India to Bengal and south into the Deccan Plateau.
That's already huge.
It is. But under Ashoka, especially at its peak after Kalinga, it got even bigger. We're talking from the borders of modern Iran across almost the entire Indian subcontinent. Just vast.
How did they even manage something that big?
Good question. They seem to have had core administrative regions beyond the Magadha heartland. The texts mention 4 key ones during Ashoka's time. Taxila up in the northwest, Ujjain in the center, Kalinga on the east coast once he conquered it, and Suvarnagiri down south. Probably run by governors, maybe family members.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So early Ashoka, is he following his father and grandfather's footsteps? More expansion, more slayer of enemies stuff?
It seems likely, yeah. Especially in the beginning. The Arthashastra, that statecraft manual we mentioned, was likely influential. It advocated a strong state, strategic thinking, and using force when needed. So Ashoka probably started out operating under those principles.
So fighting wars.
Probably. His early reign likely involved campaigns to either push the borders out further or just solidify control over the massive territory he already had.
Do we know about specific wars he fought before Kalinga? Any major wins or losses recorded?
That's where the sources get a bit thin, actually. We don't have detailed accounts of specific campaigns from his early years, unlike the Kalinga War, which he himself documented so starkly later on.
But the Mauryan army was strong.
Definitely. We know from Megasthenes, back in Chandragupta's time, they had large infantry, cavalry, and of course those war elephants. A formidable military machine. Even Kalinga, the place Ashoka eventually fought, was noted for its own strong army.
Okay, so he had the tools for conquest.
He did. And given the empire's expansion under his predecessors, it's almost certain his early reign involved military action. Maintaining control over that much land wasn't passive.
And who was the big enemy then, before Kalinga stole the show?
Well, the most significant independent power left within reach, the one really resisting Mauryan dominance, seems to have been Kalinga itself.
The kingdom on the east coast.
Yeah, exactly. Modern-day Odisha, parts of Andhra Pradesh, they'd remained outside the empire even as Chandragupta conquered most of India.
Why were they so important? Why did Ashoka eventually go after them so hard?
Strategic location, mainly. Controlling Kalinga meant controlling important trade routes, especially maritime routes to Southeast Asia. That was likely a major factor. It would consolidate the empire's eastern flank and boost its economic power. So Kalinga stands out as the big target.
Okay, before we get to that fateful war, what was the religious vibe in the empire before Ashoka's big change? Was it all just one thing?
No, not at all. It was a real mix. You had Brahmanism, which is the precursor to modern Hinduism. You had Jainism, which was quite prominent. Buddhism was emerging and growing. And another group called the Ejivikas.
So a lot going on. Did the earlier emperors favor any particular one?
There's evidence, or at least suggestions, that Chandragupta might have favored Jainism, perhaps even converting late in life. And Bindusara seems to have had connections with the Ajivikas. Some historians think the early Mauryans weren't particularly strong supporters of Brahmanism, maybe keeping some distance.
Interesting. So diverse beliefs coexisted.
Yes, but Ashoka's personal beliefs and how the empire officially presented itself were about to undergo a massive shift because of Kalinga.
Right. Let's talk about the Kalinga War. This seems to be the event.
It absolutely is. It's the hinge upon which Ashoka's entire story turns. This conflict happened in the 8th year of his reign, so around 261 BCE. It was Ashoka's Mauryan Empire against the independent state of Kalinga.
And it was bad.
Exceptionally brutal. By any account, including Ashoka's own later reflections, it was one of the deadliest, most destructive wars in ancient Indian history. Just devastating.
Oh, I mean, what made it so bad? We know Kalinga was strategically important, trade routes and all that. Ashoka wanted to complete the conquest?
Exactly. Kalinga had held out. It was prosperous. It had a strong military. Ashoka launched a full-scale invasion. We don't have blow-by-blow battle details, but the aftermath. That's what's recorded.
Recorded by Ashoka himself.
Yes, in his rock edicts. He basically puts it out there for everyone to see. He talks about the immense suffering caused. He gives numbers.
What kind of numbers?
He says something like 100,000 people were killed in the fighting itself.
100,000.
Yeah, and he says many times that number perished from disease, famine, the consequences of the war, and that maybe 150,000 people were captured and deported, taken away as prisoners.
Wow. Those are staggering numbers for an ancient conflict.
They are. Now, historians sometimes debate if the numbers are literal or perhaps exaggerated slightly for effect, to emphasize his remorse. But either way, the message is clear. The human cost was immense. Kalinga was devastated.
Do we know who ruled Kalinga then?
There's a name mentioned, Raja Anantha Padmanabha. It suggests there was a king leading the resistance. And the scale of casualties implies Kalinga fought back hard. It wasn't an easy conquest.
And seeing all this, this is what changed Ashoka.
Profoundly. The sources, especially his own edicts, express deep regret, sorrow, remorse. Witnessing the slaughter, the suffering of civilians, captives, it fundamentally altered him. He completely renounced military conquest as a policy.
Just like that. From conqueror to what?
To an advocate for Dhamma. It's a complex word, but essentially means righteousness, duty, morality, nonviolence. He shifted his entire focus from expanding the empire by force to improving the welfare of people and animals, ruling through ethical principles. It's a remarkable turnaround for any ruler, let alone one commanding such power.
So what happened right after the war? Did things change immediately?
It seems the shift was quite direct. He abandoned aggression, embraced Dhamma. He started sending out emissaries, not for war, but for peace. Ambassadors went to the Greek kingdoms in the west, other neighboring lands, spreading his message of peaceful coexistence and ethical conduct.
A complete policy reversal.
Absolutely. And you see it reflected in very practical ways described in his edicts.
Like what?
Well, take the royal kitchen. He says in one edict, Major Rock Edict 1, that previously hundreds of thousands of animals were killed daily for food in the palace.
Hundreds of thousands.
Just
daily.
That's what he claims. Maybe an exaggeration, but the point is, it was a lot. After his change of heart, he says he reduced it drastically down to just like 2 peacocks and a deer, and eventually aimed to stop killing animals for the royal table altogether.
That's a concrete change.
Very concrete. He also banned certain types of large festive gatherings where animal sacrifices were common. He was actively trying to reduce violence in society, starting at the very top.
So less killing, more morality. How did he promote that?
Through his edicts, primarily. He laid out these moral guidelines, things like respect for elders, kindness to servants, tolerance towards different religious beliefs, and crucially, non-harming of living beings, ahimsa. He even specified certain animals that should be protected, like an early form of conservation.
He mentioned protecting specific animals.
Yes, and he talks about replacing the sound of the war drum with the sound of Dhamma. Instead of military parades, maybe, he'd have officials publicly explaining these ethical principles. That's in Major Rock Edict 4. It's about shifting the entire focus of the state. Major Pillar Edict 7 also outlines the core tenets of his Dhamma.
So after Kalinga, his reign becomes defined by this Dhamma. Did he convert to Buddhism specifically?
The sources strongly suggest he did, yes. Buddhist texts certainly claim him as a major convert and patron, but it's important to remember his edicts preach tolerance and respect for all faiths, Brahmanism, Jainism, Ajivikism. He wasn't forcing Buddhism on people.
So Dhamma wasn't just Buddha.
Not exclusively. It was a broader ethical code he felt was universal. Nonviolence, compassion, tolerance, respect, social welfare. These were the pillars. Dhamma became the guiding philosophy for his administration.
How did he make sure this message got out across that huge empire?
Those edicts, for one, placed strategically on rocks and pillars, often in local scripts and languages so people could actually understand them. But he also appointed special officials.
What kind of officials?
They were called Dhamma Mahamatras, basically ministers of morality or righteousness. Their job was specifically to travel around, promote Dhamma, ensure fair treatment, look after the welfare of various communities, including different religious sects, and even populations on the frontiers, like the Greeks, Cambodians, Gontarans in the Northwest.
So he was really invested in implementing this?
Absolutely. It wasn't just talk, and it extended beyond just morality. He got heavily involved in social welfare projects.
Like public works?
Exactly. His edicts, particularly Major Rock Edict 2, talk about setting up medical facilities for both people and animals.
Medical care for animals back then?
Yeah, it's quite progressive. He arranged for medicinal herbs, roots, and fruits to be imported and planted where they didn't naturally grow. He had wells dug along roads, planted trees for shade and fruit for travelers. Really practical measures to improve people's lives.
And did this extend beyond his own borders?
It seems so. That same edict mentions providing medical aid even to the territories of neighboring Hellenistic kings like Antiochus. It shows a kind of universal concern for well-being.
It sounds like a period of maybe flourishing trade and connection, too, with all these roads and outreach.
Yes, the Mauryan period generally, and perhaps especially under Ashoka's relatively peaceful later reign, saw significant trade. The infrastructure, the diplomatic connections. India was well linked with West Asia, the Mediterranean world, Southeast Asia, maybe even China.
Was there a downside? All this focus on peace and Dhamma. Did it make the empire weaker militarily?
That's the big debate among historians. Some argue that yes, perhaps his pacifist policies, the potential downscaling of the military focus, might have weakened the empire's defenses in the long run, making it more vulnerable after his death.
So it's not a simple story of peace being universally good for the empire's strength.
It's complex. Ashoka undoubtedly brought a period of internal peace and promoted ethical values on a scale rarely seen. But the long-term impact on the empire's military readiness and political cohesion, that's something scholars still discuss and analyze.
So wrapping this up, Ashoka's story is really one of two halves, isn't it?
It really is. You have the early phase, inheriting a massive empire, likely continuing the expansionist policies of his father and grandfather, and then, boom, the Kalinga War, a moment of profound crisis and realization.
Leading to this complete shift.
Exactly. A shift towards Dhamma, peace, nonviolence, social welfare, dedicating the rest of his long reign to ruling through morality rather than might.
So the key things for us to take away: the sheer scale of the Mauryan Empire, the unbelievable brutality of Kalinga and how it changed him, and then this whole system of Dhamma he tried to implement.
Precisely. His efforts to create a more ethical state, his tolerance, his welfare projects, these are incredibly significant, even if we debate their long-term political consequences.
It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How often does a single event, even a horrific one like a war, so completely change a person, let alone the direction of an entire empire? Ashoka's legacy, this idea of conquest by righteousness, it's still powerful.
It absolutely is, and his edicts are still there, carved in stone. It's worth exploring them further, thinking about the different ways people have interpreted his reign over the centuries.
Definitely something to ponder. Well, thanks for taking us through that. A truly fascinating figure.
My pleasure. Ashoka's story is one that always makes you think.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.